Hey there, Mr. Robinson. What is our topic today?
Our topic today is we want to answer the question of why the Days of Unleavened Bread have a holy day on the first day and a holy day on the last day.
Why is there also a holy day at the end? That sounds great. Let's talk about that. Thank you again, Jake and Julia, for that musical introduction. And hello and welcome, everyone, to the podcast again. And Mr. Robinson and I were talking about this topic the other day, and a lot of you, I don't really know when this podcast is going to be posted, but if it's on a normal schedule, it's probably going to be right after the last day of Unleavened Bread. And Mr. Robinson and I were talking earlier this week about the question of why might God have put a holy day at the end of the Days of Unleavened Bread? Well, we have the first day of Unleavened Bread, but we also have this holy day on the last day of Unleavened Bread. And he actually remembered some things in the past that brought that to mind, and we thought it was a worthwhile discussion and thought it was worth having with you guys. Mr. Robinson, actually, why don't you catch us up? What brought this to mind for you?
Well, I hadn't actually thought about the topic in a while, and I think as I've stated on our other podcasts, like I don't question things really very often. You grow up and there's 2 holy days on the Days of Unleavened Bread, and that's kind of it. But like if you actually went through and tried to summarize the holy days, let's just hit the fall holy days for a minute. It's like trumpets. Well, there's a lot pictured there, and it's announcing Christ's return, and then atonement, and binding Satan, and declaring freedom to the captives, and then the holy day on the Feast of Tabernacles, and we know what that pictures. But really, there's not a holy day at the end. It feels like there is because of the way it's capped at the end there. But the last great day is its own holy day with its own meaning. And
it's not actually the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's its own holy day with its own significance and meaning, right?
So I catch myself thinking, well, there's a holy day on the first day of unleavened bread, and it represents, like unleavened bread, and then there's one on the end, and I guess it represents unleavened bread. But as you would suspect, the Bible is deep, and when you look into it, I think the meaning is amazing, and it should be faith-building to us and encouraging when we understand what it is. Mr. Ogwyn, big influence, and he's one of the main people I've ever heard discuss this. And he summarizes it really pretty succinctly. It's what Paul said in Hebrews 12:2. We're just going to summarize it. But the reason that there's a holy day, a second one at the end of the Days of Unleavened Bread, is because we are to look unto Jesus Christ as the author and finisher of our faith. Now, that word author there, if you look into it a little bit there in the Greek, it means beginning or originator. That's another way you can look at it. So the implication is Christ begins a work and he's going to finish it. And that's the purpose of the last day of Unleavened Bread, if you oversimplify it. First day of Unleavened Bread pictures us our journey. We begin our own personal exodus. It's our journey out of Egypt, which is picturing sin, and we're supposed to leave on this journey. And it's filled with symbolism because we've already cleaned out the unleavened bread, but that's not enough. We've removed what symbolizes sin, but we don't just do nothing else. We eat unleavened bread on the journey, which symbolizes putting righteousness in. So we replace sin with righteousness. But it's a tough journey, and Pharaoh is after us. And when you read the Exodus account, the Israelites end up trapped essentially in a box canyon, and there's no way for them to finish the journey themselves. They need God to complete the journey, to part the Red Sea, and take them safely to the other side.
Wow. I think that is such a crucial point. I know in the previous podcast I left links to 2 Living Church News articles, one by Dr. Scott Winnell concerning how do you begin to evaluate whether you're ready for baptism as a young individual growing up in the church, and then also one myself that an article that I had written about the lessons that Passover teaches us about the Days of Unleavened Bread, and what you've just said is part of what I wanted to include and get across in that article. It does remind me, and I mentioned before the podcast while we were discussing putting this together, that I'm reminded of John 15, where Jesus Christ highlights in the early verses there in John 15 that he is the vine and we are the branches, and we can really do nothing without him. It's easy to think of us constantly relying on ourselves, that if you don't think yourself as relying on God, then suddenly our faith becomes essentially like we just need a bunch of self-help books.
Right.
How do you master all your habits? How do you build good habits? How do you what are all the 7 steps to this? But all of those books of the world, as great as some of them are, I'm not saying that it's not great advice out there that we can't take advantage of it, but it really is just kind of a carnal assault on self-will and the rest. Versus we actually need Jesus Christ to do these things. We need him to bring us out of sin, and we need him working within us to help us conquer these things. That he really is both the author and the finisher. I don't know who will read that article that I linked to, but part of the motivation of the article was really just one particular experience I had, which I'll relate, and hopefully it relates to this. Mr. Robinson, if it doesn't relate to this topic, feel free in front of all these people to let me know at the end if it doesn't relate to it. I'll take it like a man.
All right.
Okay. Way back when Jonathan, my oldest son Jonathan, was a wee little lad. A wee little lad. Anyway, we were at my wife's aunt's house in their backyard, and all the kids were little. I say all the kids. I don't know that Michael existed. Michael probably existed. I don't think that Benjamin did, because Jonathan was still very, very young. But he was old enough to be on a tricycle, but young enough that it was still a struggle to push the pedals. Well, if he was on the concrete, he'd be fine. And they had a big concrete driveway that when they're on the concrete, hey, it's free going. But it was in the grass, and the grass was very difficult. You got a little tricycle and these tiny little pedals without a whole lot of torque to it. And he was on that tricycle, and he was just struggling at those pedals. He was determined. He wanted to ride the tricycle, and you could tell he was wanting to get it to the concrete, but it was going nowhere. So I walk up to him and say, "Hey, Jonathan, why don't you just get off? Let's just put the tricycle on the concrete. Then you can ride all you want." Well, he didn't really want to do that. And I said, "Well, I could pull you, and he could just." He said, "Well, no, he wanted to do it. He wanted to make it." So, well, okay, tell you what, because there was no way he was getting to that concrete, on his little baby legs and his little tricycle. And I said, "Well, tell you what, all right, I want you to keep pushing. I want you to keep trying. As long as you're pushing the pedals, I will give you the extra help you need to get to the concrete. But I'm only going to do it if you're going to do your part. If you're not going to push those pedals, I'm not doing anything." So he thought that was a good idea. So sure enough, the moment he started pushing against the pedals, I began pushing the tricycle. So now it's making its way to the driveway. Now he's making progress through the grass, and he's pushing against the pedals as hard as he can. And at some point in his little brain, he kind of figures out, well, actually, a free ride would be kind of nice. And you just see him pick his legs up. He just threw his legs right to either side and stopped pedaling.
We actually underestimate how brilliant kids really are.
Oh, they are. They are. My wife had to convince me of that until I saw enough evidence, and she was completely right. So I saw him, he said, "Hey, actually, free ride's not so bad." So he picks his feet up. So I stopped pushing, because that wasn't the deal, right? And so he realizes, okay, progress has stopped. I need to go back. So he puts his feet on the pedals. He's pushing again, and I'm pushing him. And once he gets to the pavement, then he's golden, right? I didn't have to do anything, and he's just all over the place. And boy, that just really sank in with me as a picture of our progress towards salvation and eventually being in the kingdom. Because Jonathan, what I wanted of him was to learn the lesson, okay, fine, but don't give up then. That's fine. Right. You want to be there? Right. I want you to be there too. Then if you don't give up, I'll get you there. I'll make sure you're there. But the fact is, even if he had struggling against the pedals, when I did nothing, he accomplished virtually nothing. I mean, he could not move a centimeter forward in that grass with his tiny little baby legs. So to a certain extent, it was me, but my goal was my goal wasn't just to get Jonathan to the driveway. It was to get, if you will, a better Jonathan to the driveway. Yes. One that had struggled with me, one that had learned to put his all into it. And then to go further, I thought of the driveway as that's like the kingdom. Now you've got it. You're free. Right. You're just all over. You don't need that help anymore because you've internalized what you need to, and you're doing it yourself.
He crossed his Red Sea.
He came
out on the other side dry shod.
So I was the author and finisher of his trip to the driveway, but it wouldn't have happened because it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't done what he did, because that was my goal, was to work with him so he could grow in the ways he needed to grow.
I think that is a fantastic analogy.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm not just saying that for just any reason. I often think, because, you and I have these kind of discussions, and we listen to other podcasts and other people's takes on God, and, it ranges everywhere from God as just this kind of a capricious guy who gets grumpy and does mean things. And viewing God through the prism of being a father, I think, is probably one of the best ways you can possibly look at it. Like, we're both fathers, of course, and what does Dad do? Well, Dad's a little more judgmental than Mom is. Jordan Peterson says he thinks the best way to describe God is as a judgmental father, and I was like,
oh, really?
That's actually kind of right, actually.
Yeah,
Mom's always there.
Say that's a facet.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. We so desperately want our children to succeed, but we know. And a lot of this is also, you have to give credit where credit's due, is church teaching and biblical understanding. We know these things because of that. But we understand that if we jump in there and save our kid every time there's a problem, we see them struggle and we want to go take over for them, and it's a natural instinct, but we want them to be a better version of Jonathan at the end of that.
Yeah.
We
want them to be.
So I think Dad is a very good way of looking at it. It also explains some things, because a lot of people who don't understand God view him as mean and judgmental, and now he's the uber God, right? I mean, he's at the top end, so what he's trying to accomplish is a far larger scale than what we're doing. He can resurrect people. There's a whole plan at work here. So, but at the end of the day, I really feel like one of the best ways, and I know we're kind of drifting from our topic a little bit here, the example of and I think I've even maybe mentioned it on the podcast before, but the prodigal son. Mm-hmm. And the story centers around the prodigal son, but Dad also had to let the son go out and learn the hard lesson.
Right. I hate to give two stories in the same thing, but because I often do think about this on Passover season. I used to not be able to communicate it well without kind of breaking down, because it just gets it's kind of a personal thought. But trying to understand that I've heard God sometimes depicted as a coach, right? And so I think of the scenario I had in my mind. Every guy, look, I'm the least sportsy person I know, probably. You're actually one of the more sportsy people, to the point that you've damaged your body doing sports. I think that's quite an achievement.
Did I ever tell you about the time I actually played a volleyball game on a broken knee? That's actually a true story.
It is a true story. That's right. I can tell you many stories of the volleyball games I didn't play. So I'm not a sportsy person, but look, everyone wants to be the guy that catches the football for the winning touchdown. Absolutely. Or in my case, wants to be the Luke Skywalker who barely makes the shot right at the end,
the hero's journey.
That's exactly right, the hero's journey. So if you'll allow me a sports story that's not real,
this should be
in my head. Thanks.
I'm ready.
So, you can imagine in terms of our relationship with God, we're striving and we feel like we've been trained. We're doing our best. And what does every boy want? He wants, well, at least I did, even non-sporty me, this picture of like a rainy game where you're down by 6. No, you're down by 5, because it's the last moments of the game. You need a touchdown to get those 6 points, and the coach asks you to catch the ball. It's going to be crazy. Maybe you won't be able to get it, but if you do everything you're supposed to do, you should be able to do this and pull it off. And because you want, a guy doesn't feel like a hero unless he knows all the odds were against him. So that's why the rain is necessary and the rest. Maybe you're injured in some way. Fill in the details you want. But sure enough, the play gets called. You're running. You're there in the end zone, and the quarterback pulls it off. Perfect spiral, coming right to you. No reason you really shouldn't be able to catch it. But sure enough, as you get it, you just feel it slip through your arms. Something has gone, you've done something wrong. Even in the moment, you may not even know exactly what went wrong. You just know something went wrong. And that was the last play of the game. So you lose the big championship. You lost. So you feel terrible. Even watching Super Bowls or football games, I've always can't help but feel bad for that guy. Now I've since learned a little differently, like the old Theodore Roosevelt man in the arena thing. It's like, hey, he was there and I wasn't.
Right,
he was there.
Right.
But still, you just can't help but feel that loss. You feel devastated in that moment that you lost, not just for you, but for everybody. Yep. And I guess my point is, part of what helped transform my thinking about God in that scenario was that it's too often to picture God as the coach who's maybe just disappointed like the rest of the team, throws his hat down. Smith messed up again. Why in the world did I, have him in that play? And instead, not picturing God as that coach, but the dad in the stands.
Yep.
Who, when the entire crowd has just, they've all just made that noise of disappointment, and they sit down, and they're all crushed at your failure, that he's the one who stays standing so you can see him, and that you're encouraged to, because he knows how you feel.
Yeah.
He was the one who taught you all these things to begin with, and he's the one that, if he can cry it out loud, if he can, it's like, hey, don't worry about it, we'll work on it. Come back, and not that you settle for failure, but that he's with you the whole. That picture of God as a father. I don't think I've ever finished. I certainly haven't finished mining. That picture of God as a father, and a father is with you, and that's what he was at the Red Sea with Israel. You read, was it Exodus 15 or something earlier? You made a comment. Oh, Exodus 14. Because I did note it. I want to credit Ms. Robinson. You said this verse, but you made a comment about it. It was you had the Israelites. They're right there at the Red Sea, and in verse 5 it says, no, it's not verse 5.
It's 15.
Thank you, verse 15. Thank you. In verse 15 it says, the Eternal said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward." Because of course they're looking at all this. Why would they go forward? But you said, we have one job. Our one job is to go forward, and you just trust him to take care of the rest.
Exactly. It really, what God wants to see so often is a little faith, a little belief that he can do what he says he's going to do, that he can begin the journey and he can finish the journey. And I think it's interesting because if you start to go through this Exodus account, this is why I think it was so crucial to understand that the events of the Red Sea and the beginning of the crossing of it were on the last day of unleavened bread, and going through that section of scripture here in Exodus 14, like brings all those stories to light. So, for example, if you just continue the story, you see Moses feeling a little helpless, and God's like, "Why do you cry to me? Move forward," right? And then from then on out, God really does the heavy lifting. Like, we have to do our part. But I suspect if you could figure out the physics of how much energy you put into getting Jonathan across the lawn and how much Jonathan put in, you probably did the majority of the work together.
Yes.
I was a kid and I had a big wheel, and going across grass is pretty tough. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then from that point out, Moses is instructed to do his part. So he stretches his hands out. But really, in general, after that, God's doing the hard work. He goes through, and you could just, if summarize the account, he says, "I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians for," he's got his purposes. He wants the Egyptians to know that he's the Lord. And then he goes and he sends a strong wind, and it parts the Red Sea. We can't do that. He even dries the ground so it's easy for them to get across, and they work their way across. He moves the cloud and the fire between the Egyptians and the Israelites to section them off so that the Israelites can safely go through and hold off the Egyptians. And he even causes them to have trouble. Let's see, how's it phrased in there? I don't remember, but he causes the Egyptians trouble and pulls their wheels off. So now the Egyptians are trying to get through, and then it's slow going, and they're starting to get terrified. And then God allows the waters to collapse back on. That's all God walking. And what was Israel's requirement? To walk through the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. And so their God is, at the end of the journey, being the finishers. I think this is such a great conclusion here. Exodus 14, 30 and 31. At the conclusion of the crossing and the destruction of the Egyptian army, God says, "So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses." So God initiates the action. The Passover symbolism, it's the children of Israel's responsibility to respond to God and begin the Exodus and the journey out of Egypt. But at the end, they found themselves stuck again, and God allowed them to be in that situation so that he would see if they had faith or not. We're being tested all along the way to see how faithful we are, that we just believe that God's going to do what he says and that he can complete the work that he began in us.
Wow. Actually, it's so funny you put that up because I literally pulled that verse up that I thought maybe we would wrap up with. That the last day of unleavened bread is clearly connected with the crossing of the Red Sea. Your lesson that God helps us finish what we do. He doesn't just start it, but he actually is with us the whole time, and he helps us to finish. He does the heavy lifting so that, like Philippians 1:6 says, which you just went there, Philippians 1:6, so that we can be confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in us will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. So knowing that he is there to help us, we really do have just one job, which is
keep moving forward. We don't need to get into this deeply, but Mr. O'Gwen also extrapolates out from this lesson our duty as Christians to keep working on the purpose that we were called for. The primary purpose we were called for was to do the work. Keep moving forward with the work. I think there's been a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years that you and I have talked about that remind us of how important it is to understand where the work is being done and to be where God fits you in, to be active in doing that job. Like keep moving forward, keep doing it regardless of the obstacles. And that's a good lesson for us to understand.
It is. You think about it, even in this time with the Days of Unleavened Bread that we're wrapping up, there were Israelites, clearly, leaving Egypt, but there were also this mixed multitude who were not of Israel, but who left as well. I think they realized. But what did they realize? Hey, these Israelites are people of great faith. I want to be with them. No, it was actually this God that they worshipped is amazing. They follow him. I'm going to follow as well. Exactly. It wasn't really, because I've seen that on. I don't want to pick on people, and we can all do this sometimes. But on Facebook, sometimes people kind of point to, how do I put it? It's a little bit of virtue signaling sometimes on Facebook. We want to share with others of faith or sometimes, but sometimes it almost borders, at least for some posts, on a bit of a boastfulness, where it's all about, hey, my faith is amazing, or it's like, well, you just don't see the great people in the Bible going around talking about how big their faith is. They just kind of point to God, right? And if anything, they're humbled to be allowed to be a part of the journey.
I could not agree more. In fact, I had while we were talking, I had pulled up something that I thought, well, maybe it would be interesting to suggest or to talk about, but in the fork of the conversation wasn't necessary. But now that you say that, it really, what a great point that you don't see the heroes of the Bible kind of pounding their chest and pointing out the things they're great at. And I think one of the greatest examples of that is, and I've used it before, but when the disciples have gone back to fishing and they're not catching anything, and Christ shows up and tells them, gives what fishermen apparently will tell you is not good advice, and where to cast, and they pull up all this fish. And what was Simon, or was this what it says there, it calls him in Luke, Simon Peter? Mm-hmm. He fell down at Jesus' knees saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." A real crushing moment for Peter, where he realized how incapable he was. He couldn't even catch fish, and that's like his profession. And Christ comes over and tells him to do one thing, and the results are there. It's a bounty they could have never pulled off themselves. So important for us to realize we have to do our part, like Jonathan on the tricycle, but we are incapable of completing our journey on our own, by our own strength. And one of the most important things you can do is come to that realization so that you do rely on Christ to help you through the difficult times.
Man, thank you for bringing that up. This season, just, I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but this season, that passage, that specific verse you actually mentioned where Peter comes to Jesus, has been sort of my meditation verse this whole season out of Luke, where Peter says that, where he's moved, he recognizes, God is moving, and he's in the presence of that, and he is so unworthy, and he comes to that point, depart from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. What he doesn't say is, I'm so glad you're mine. I'm so full of faith. It's like you've picked the right Joe, buddy. I'm your guy. It really is that recognition in that last day of unleavened bread, associated the way it is with as we mentioned in the Living Church News, with the parting of the Red Sea, is that kind of reminder. Even in Exodus 15, which follows immediately after, you don't see them singing about their own great faith, their own this, In fact, that's one. I used to be. I've mentioned this in a sermon, I think. So self-righteous about the Prince of Egypt, which is a really good cartoon. It's a great cartoon depiction of the events of the Exodus. It's not perfect, of course. It's not. But it actually is. There's parts that genuinely move me. But one of the irritating things that really, I think, helped me build this self-righteous attitude about the cartoon was when they are finally leaving Egypt. They sing this song, which was clearly meant for popular consumption generally. In fact, there's a Mariah Carey or something version of it. I can't remember if it's Mariah Carey. It could be Whitney Houston. I have no idea. 80s, 90s, something like that. But it's about... If you believe, I think it's about if you believe. But it's really them singing about their own strength. Oh, we were moving mountains before we even knew we were moving mountains, because I guess they helped build things in Egypt.
I haven't seen it in a while.
Well, I love it, actually. It's very good, but that song really irritates me. And it's interesting because it's subtle, and it makes you feel good. Oh, yeah, we can do wonderful things. We were moving mountains before we knew. If you believe, it turns your belief into like a magical pixie dust kind of thing. Now, Exodus 15 is the opposite. Exodus 15, which is the actual song they sing after the parting of the Red Sea, is all about pointing to God, is all about His greatness and the impact He has on the world. It's not about them. They've been moved by the fact that God has done this heavy lifting for them, and they sing about it. And it's really focused on praising Him. Now, trivia, in that song of the Prince of Egypt, the Song of Moses is also sung, it's packed in there, sung by children in Hebrew. There's apparently sections in Hebrew, so it's not in the English. You don't get that. But I do feel that's one of the lessons that we do need to walk away with. It's one of the reasons I really appreciate you bringing up this topic today. So I think we can probably wrap things up. But if you had to kind of give everybody a takeaway statement, how would you put it, Mr. Robinson?
I would say the takeaway is be aware that we're on a journey, but that God very much wants us to complete this journey. And He is there for us, and don't forget it, and don't try to lean too much on your own strength and understanding and rely on God to finish it. But you can't just give up and stop pedaling. You have to do your part. You have to do your part. But God will do most of the work. And as times, it really feels increasing. It's not hard to envision in the next few years the church falling under persecution with how the culture has changed so much. And if you really look at what the church teaches, it's considered hate, a lot of it.
And we're not keeping our heads low. The work makes us visible. Yeah.
And all the more if you haven't built a good relationship with Christ and had your faith strengthened, it's going to become very difficult when the world turns its attention and eyes on us, and it's not going to be fun.
All right.
So that was a dark ending.
Well, how about a reminder that God is ready to do the heavy lifting for us. We can count on Him to do that, and we have one job.
Yep, we just have one job. Keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward.
Smith and Robinson.